And
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is counting on America's support after another scathing attack against him by Donald Trump. The US president criticised his counterpart, who claimed an end to the war with Russia is very, very far away. Well, Donald Trump is currently speaking in the White House and said that President Zelensky should be more appreciative.
This country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border. I'm not knocking Europe. I'm saying that they were a lot smarter than Joe Biden, because Joe Biden didn't have a clue. He just gave money hand over fist.
Police have confirmed 2 people have died after a car drove into a crowd in western Germany. Police in Mannheim say they've arrested a suspect. Officials in the Vatican say the Pope's condition worsened this afternoon, resulting in 2 episodes of respiratory failure. Doctors claim the 88-year-old had a significant amount of mucus in his lungs. Ofcom has warned the BBC it may choose to intervene in an investigation into its programme on Gaza. Complaints were made after it emerged the narrator of the film was the son of a senior Hamas official. The BBC admitted the programme had serious flaws. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 61 points at 88.71. The pound buys $1.27 and €1.21. LBC weather, dry and clear tonight for Wales and southern England. Spots of rain further north and a low of -4. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, welcome to the programme. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. It's Monday, it's Cross Question, and here's our panel. To my left, Helen Maguire, Liberal Democrat MP for Epsom and Ewell. Now, is that Chris Grayling's former seat?
Yes, that's
correct. It was. Wow,
yeah.
There you go. She's the party's defence spokesperson. Simon Hart, former Conservative MP and Chief Whip, got his diaries out at the moment. You will no doubt have read them in the Daily Mail or read extracts. Zoe Strimpel is to my right, columnist for the Sunday Telegraph. And next to her, Aggie, Chambre, LBC's political correspondent. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can WhatsApp us on that number, and we'd love you to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go straight to your first question. It's from Matthew in Heathrow. Hello, Matthew.
Oh, hi, Ian. Yeah, I'd like to ask the panel, could we actually manage without Trump in the USA and make our own minerals deal with Ukraine and then get on with getting the ceasefire done and giving the security they need?
Hello, Maguire.
Thank you. Hi, Matthew. Thank you for that question. So I think the challenge that we have at the moment is that US has always been our kind of security backstop. And so if we look at Article 5 within NATO, if that's ever triggered, then we've obviously always relied on the US. And a lot of our military systems are currently heavily integrated with the US. So really, it's very difficult to see a position where we could be without support from the US. But obviously, there's no need to, have a deal with minerals involved. I'm not sure if that was something that Biden was looking at. We'd all obviously like to see a ceasefire in Ukraine as soon as possible. And it would be great if the US obviously could be involved in that and continue to support the UK and the European allies.
What about having our own mineral deal? Because it does seem a little odd when European countries together have put in more money than the United States, despite what Donald Trump keeps saying, that they will get their money back, or that's the plan, and we won't.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, interesting proposal, and something that Keir Starmer, could talk to Zelensky about. It's not something I've thought about, before this evening, but perhaps he can have a conversation. I don't know, but it's interesting. I mean, obviously the US are looking for this. Like you said, Europe and the UK are putting in a lot of money into Ukraine, but let's see what Keir Starmer does.
Simon.
Yeah, I think the idea that we can somehow go it alone in the defence arena is for the birds. I think the idea that, attractive though it may seem, that we can deal with this particular project.
When you say we, do you mean the UK or the whole of Europe?
Talk about UK and Europe. I think we're doing it without the US is, I think, also a overly optimistic scenario that isn't realistic. Now, I don't think we're actually at that point. I think there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of sort of rhetoric, there's typical sort of Trump attitude to this sort of thing, which is just sort of making headlines. So I don't, at the moment, I don't think we should read into this that somehow the US is on the point of sort of suddenly taking itself away from the particular...
But Trump has more or less said that this afternoon. That he has more than hinted that they will cut off all military aid to Ukraine within the next 2 weeks.
I don't think there is any... the trouble is, isn't it, with Trump? I sort of find myself almost repeating now Nigel Farage's comments the other day, which is, you can't take him literally, which is pretty frustrating if you happen to be a voter. It's pretty frustrating if you're
a broadcaster.
It's frustrating for everybody. So I don't actually think we're in that position. I think this is his sort of default setting about being seen to be being strong, being seen to be doing deals. I just think, by the way, on the mineral point, I think that the question was about whether the UK or Europe could have its own sort of mineral deal. I actually think at the moment, again, this has come out of left field somewhat, but I do think it makes the idea that the US is likely sort of literally buy into Ukraine in terms of its mineral supplies does create an entirely different dynamic as far as the potential sort of peace deal with Russia is concerned. Is all of this clear? No, well, none of us, I suspect, including you, by the expression on your face.
I'm completely bemused by the whole thing.
Literally, nobody knows what the hell is going to happen next. We are talking about in the world of the unknown. This has exceeded all possible expectations.
Even Donald Rumsfeld, known unknowns. He would be completely flummoxed by this.
It's just absurd.
Zoe Strimpel.
Well, I think the question of whether we can go it alone without the US, is a tempting one to answer. Well, yes. Britain used to be. Let's look back to the glorious past and think. We used to be. The greatest. You could argue that Britain saved the world in World War II. I've always been someone who says Britain is capable of doing things that we talk ourselves out of believing. We can do. There's a lot of declinism around. The question, obviously, as Helen said, we are very integrated with all U.S. systems, and we've taken for granted and assumed and come to 100% rely on that U.S. backstop. But I think the question starts to be, what even is the U.S. now? What are we talking about when we say the U.S.? If the U.S. becomes an enemy state, which is on the side of the world's great rogues and autocrats and dictators and sadists, and starts to form alliances with them, then I don't think that is the US that we all lean on as having our kind of
look at who they voted with in the United Nations last week.
Yeah. Oh, who did?
The United States.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Korea.
So what is the United States now? And who is it? Who is this great friend? If it spots change to the degree that it becomes a different creature, which I think there's a real risk of that happening now. As for the minerals deal, okay, great. Let's get rich out of Ukraine. Why not? But what is this new paradigm where you exact recompense for helping with a war that we all know, despite what Trump may say, nothing has served us. This is literally kind of what's the balance of power in the world going to end up being? Are we giving a green light to people to just invade willy-nilly and impose, endless amounts of despair, misery?
Yeah.
And so
that's exactly
what it comes down to.
America is about to do.
But if we're saying, let's muscle in, we're going to turn this into an opportunity for our own enrichment. Britain needs enrichment, don't get me wrong, but we should be pushing back and sort of just saying, hang on, what has Trump just suddenly done to the whole point of aid, U.S. support for valid projects? And we know now that China is thinking about, using this moment to kind of go for Taiwan. And if we defend Taiwan, if the U.S. does, is that going to be another thing? Fine, hand over all of your, chips or whatever. It's just a bizarre... new world. But just to say one more thing, though, because everyone's been saying, we don't know what to say about, can we take Trump seriously or not? He may not halt the weapons, or the aid, even though he says he's going to. part of it, I think you've got to believe people when they tell you who they are and what they're going to do. And I think there's too many instances where we say, oh, but he's just Trump, you never know, and then end up completely shocked and bewildered and breathless. And the urge to believe that the terrible, terrible truth that appears to be emerging between those schoolyard bullies of Vance and Trump isn't true. Yeah. And I think it very well might be.
I've fallen into that trap myself on
and that's why I think this question is a good one, because this may be the situation we are forced to be in.
Aggie.
I think there's two different questions. I think, can we, and I mean Britain and Europe, do it without America? Probably the answer is no. Might we? The answer could well be yes, if you listen to what Donald Trump is saying. And I think to Zoe's point, you're completely right. Believe what he is saying. And it is sometimes difficult to believe what he is saying because he walks back, for example, calling Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator and then saying 3 days ago, did I say that? Anyway, next question. So I think it can be difficult to believe exactly what he is saying and stay consistent on that. But in terms of kind of the pure defence numbers, in terms of where we are with defence, and yes, we are upping defence, but not until 2027. Other European countries pay less than us on defence. And I think, speaking to people around the government, one of the reasons that we decided to up our defence spending was because of the situation in Ukraine, but also to tempt other countries in Europe to up their spending, and you can put more pressure on if you are upping that spending. So in terms of whether that might happen, I think Keir Starmer is very, very keen for that not to happen. He was saying earlier in the comments, you know, the idea of being without the US, the idea of having to choose between the US and Ukraine is kind of utterly, totally unserious. But if Donald Trump forces his hand, well, then Europe and Britain will have to work out exactly where to go next. And I think that is why that question is so difficult to answer, because we simply do not know what happens at that stage, because everyone keeps talking about a backstop. But what if that backstop simply never comes to the table?
Matthew, great question. Thank you. Let's take a follow-up question from John in Reading. John, go ahead.
Evening, panel. Evening, Iain. My question is, can we actually trust a nuclear assistance from the Americans anymore? And will we have to now rely on the French and have a French defence nuclear pact? Could I also add in a second example? Say, for instance, I know this is a bit extreme, but if Russia launched a nuclear missile or a ballistic missile at any European or any country in the EU, can we actually rely on the Americans to fight back against that now?
Simon Hart, the fact that John even has to ask that question is interesting, isn't it? Because he wouldn't have asked that question 5 years ago.
He probably wouldn't have asked that question 5 days ago, if the truth were known. And I worry. In some ways, on these kind of things, you can sort of dismiss that kind of question as not really, what possible scenario could you see that unfolding? But the reality is now it is not as illegitimate a question as it once might have been. I still think, by the way, and maybe it's just an eternal optimist in me, I do think that the old world order would hold together in those extreme circumstances which the question raises. I don't think it is quite as clear as it was. That is an absolute rock solid definite. But I don't feel when you read what other American politicians are saying, what other world leaders are saying, that particular balance, that particular arrangement is under threat in a way that we would be left.
But NATO is based on all for one and one for all. If one is invaded or attacked, then the others come to its aid. Although I was listening to something the other day where someone was explaining, well, it's not quite as cut and dried as that if you actually read Article 5, which rather worried me. But you can easily imagine, so let's come to you on this. You can easily imagine that if Britain was attacked, whether it was a nuclear attack or some other form of attack, that America would come to our aid. And Donald Trump said that to Keir Starmer on Thursday. But if Estonia is attacked...
Yeah, because Donald Trump and his gang are setting up this kind of completely, huge misunderstanding. That's what they're putting forward about what the point of that NATO ethos is, which is what does Estonia have to do with us? You know, you can boil everything down to that. That's to do with foreign affairs. We've got nothing from defending Ukraine, as if the threat of a kind of unbridled Russia and its axis isn't a threat. No, but it's Ukraine. It's all the way over there, and that's what all those MAGA guys are saying. So yeah, absolutely. Britain, we like you guys. I'm going to see, the king in Balmoral. Estonia, why would America, put itself out for that? backwater. So there's no way he will accept that.
It's very bizarre
that
Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia weren't invited to that summit yesterday, given that they're on the front line.
Oh, yeah.
Do you say Starmer hasn't heard of them?
I see Starmer. Starmer has heard of them. Yeah, no, I was thinking of Trump.
Because I think he had to ring them up and assure them that he wasn't ignoring them. But I did think that
he should pay a lot more. Those guys are really important in Poland.
I mean, like Simon, I have to believe yes, but it is more difficult. I mean, Trump did tell Starmer when he was over and that kind of, well, seemingly at the time, very successful States visit back on Thursday, which seems like a million years ago. He did tell him that he does believe in Article 5, which seemed like a great success at the time. But then you also have situations like
he even knew what Article 5 was.
Well, apparently he did say that he does believe in it. But then you have situations like on Friday.
He didn't know what AUKUS was, did he? He had to have that explained to him.
Yeah, I think that's right. But then you have situations on Friday where you have Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump in the White House together, and at that point, Donald Trump just will not say that he's on Ukraine's side. Basically, said I'm in the middle between Russia and Ukraine. So if it is, if he won't say that he's not on Russia's side, and something like that happens, well, then you're in a bit of a difficult position, aren't you?
Helen.
Yeah, well, like everyone else, I think we'd like to believe that obviously we can trust America for nuclear assistance. I think the biggest challenge that we've got, as I mentioned before, is that all of our systems are intertwined with the American. So our nuclear system is intertwined with the American. So we rely upon them. And anything to do with nuclear takes, years, if not decades, to either take apart or put together. So it's not something that you can sort of change very quickly. It's not like training some soldiers, to go out to the front line, which you might be able to do in some weeks or months. This is a long-term decision, that the country's going to have to make. So it's complicated.
So why did Ed Davey at PMQ say what he did? Because he was really pouring a lot of cold water on the Anglo-American alliance. And Keir Starmer reacted quite trenchantly to it, called him not serious.
Yeah, I think what we're saying at the moment is that we're not sure how much we can trust Trump. I mean, we've seen how 1 minute he says one thing, he calls President Zelensky a dictator, and another minute he retracts that statement. So we're just saying, are they becoming an unreliable partner? We don't know, and that's why we're saying that what we need to do right now is look to our European allies and strengthen our forces with them.
And the part of the question was also, should we move towards a nuclear pact with the French? Now, this is totally out of my area of knowledge, but we do have quite a lot of defence pacts with France. I think Boris Johnson's, or Rishi Sunak, came to some sort of agreement.
One thing I was going to add is I just don't think we should underestimate the level of sort of intertwined intelligence gathering and actual intelligence that already exists and has not been affected by any of this. We're all sort of talking about what happens if a missile starts heading our way. The idea that we're not already, to some extent, under attack from Russia and have been for some time, whether that's cyber or some other electronic means, again, I think is naive. And the combined might of the US intelligence services alongside some of the other intelligence services talk here, I'm sure, but I don't know, I'm sure remains undiminished as a result of what we're experiencing at the moment.
I wonder whether that's going to continue to be the case, though, when you have the American Defense Secretary ordering whichever department it is within the American government to stop monitoring Russian cyber attacks. I mean, you think, well, what does that tell us about what the American administration really thinks? Anyway, we'll move on in a moment because we need to. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC.
We
Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on Global Player. This is LBC.
So I said no.
8:20, we have Helen Maguire from the Liberal Democrats, Simon Hart from the Conservatives, Zoe Strimpel from the Sunday Telegraph, and Aggie Chambre from LBC as our panel. Before we come to the next question, Simon Hart, let's talk for a couple of minutes about your diaries. Quite explosive stuff. I didn't read the serial because I never like reading serialisation, so I'd much rather read the whole book. I am licking my lips. I mean, is there anything that... I mean, often when you write a diary, you have to take quite a lot out. I mean, did you take quite a lot out? Because what you've left in is quite something.
There were bits which we took out just part of the process because...
libel lawyers got involved.
The Cabinet Office, this thing called the Radcliffe Rules, you're familiar with, requires a Cabinet Office to be able to sign off on any memoir.
You do know that you didn't actually have to obey them. They can't force you to.
That may be the case, but I did obey them, and I had actually no dispute with them over it. But I think it was important to try and remain faithful to the whole concept of diaries, which is not to sort of rewrite them retrospectively. It was tempting. There were things that I said, I thought, oh God, I can't have possibly believed that at the time. But apparently I did. And so I'd wanted to remain faithful to that. And you know, even though it might have made a bit of a fool of myself in the process. And I also wanted some of the examples that I know that serialisation dealt with to be more sort of jaw-dropping and you couldn't make it up, rather than in any way just purely, well, wasn't that funny? In many respects, the examples weren't funny. They've got us talking, so I think that's helpful. But were they funny? No, not particularly. I thought they were quite tragic.
And did you start the diary when you became Chief Whip, or had you always kept a diary?
No, I started in 2010 when I...
Oh, is Volume 2 coming up?
Well, I started in 2010. I mean, all this was about, I thought, my kids were 8 and 10 at the time. I thought, well, there'll be a moment when they wonder where the hell I've been the last decade. I thought, well, and my idea was I will write something down which...
Volume 2, Absent Father.
Amused me. You know, I didn't want to write about the sort of second reading of the digital inclusion bill. You can read Hansard if you want to read that. But I thought I'd just stuff which added, you know, which made you sort of think, wow, you know, the Westminster is an interesting and strange place.
Well, you're going to come on the programme, I can't remember the date, but not...
Thursday,
is it this Thursday? Is it really this Thursday? Oh, God, I've only got 2 days to read it then. Oh, my goodness. Right, well, Simon will be on the programme on Thursday for an hour, dishing the dirt, basically. It's Aggie.
Can I ask some questions about or do I have to wait until Thursday about the serialisation?
What, now?
Yeah.
You want to take over the programme, that's what you're saying.
I just want to ask some questions. OK, do you have to tell people, when you do, some of the serialisation stories are just astonishing, one of an MP being stuck in a brothel. Do you tell the MP beforehand? Well, or, I mean, presumably they knew.
The answer is that presumably they did know. Those stories were anonymised for a purpose. It wasn't about the individual, actually. It was about the bizarre circumstances which used to confront us every day of every week, and probably, you know, dare I say, it's probably confronting the current Chief Whip with just as much frequency as I encountered it. So, so we were very careful to try and make sure that we didn't sort of heap even more difficulty on people who might be involved in this kind of thing.
Fair enough. And one final question, I promise, Iain. So in it, you talk about a reshuffle and you talk about a minister that Rishi Sunak was very, very rude about. Lots of people thought that he was being rude about Kemi Badenoch. You've said it wasn't Kemi Badenoch, but has Kemi Badenoch been in touch to say everybody thinks this is me?
Lots of people wanted that to be the case. Again, I suppose I kicked myself a bit in thinking, in an attempt to be fair and to anonymise some of these things, I would just not mention a name. It wasn't meant to be about a name. It was meant to be about the pressures and the difficulties and the passion which is associated with a reshuffle.
Sorry, I'll worm it out of him when I've got an hour on Thursday.
On countless occasions, literally in the last week, I think I've done about 10 interviews, and everybody said, was it Kemi? The answer is no, it wasn't Kemi, but I anonymised it in the book for a reason, and I'm not going to breach that now.
How disappointing. So Thursday at 8, more with Simon Hart. His book is called Ungovernable.
Have another go then.
I will. Right. Actually, we have a question on your book coming up a little bit later. But this is a text question from Clarissa in Sevenoaks. By the way, first lesson of book PR, Simon, bring a book on set with you so you can brandish it at the camera.
I've got one next door. I forgot to
It's
bring
too
it
late. Too late. We'll get it in the break. Now, this is from Clarissa in Sevenoaks. I heard Nigel Farage on LBC this morning suggest that maybe it's time for Zelensky to step aside. Does the panel think that having a new person at the helm would help secure peace or just make Trump happy with no other effect? Now, the Reform UK leader was taking calls with Nick Ferrari this morning and said that the Ukrainian president had overplayed his hand in the White House, but added that good is going to come of the row in the Oval Office. Aggie.
I think the answer is probably no, just because of the popularity of Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine at the moment. But it does feel increasingly difficult, the kind of ratcheting up of words between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump. And it's difficult to know where we're going to go from here. You have Donald Trump basically saying on Truth Social tonight that this guy doesn't seem to want peace. And Volodymyr Zelensky, I think, basically has kind of got to the point where potentially he might step down if a peace deal was already agreed. But it seems like he is the person at the moment to get to that point. But if it feels like the peace deal is slipping further and further away, Donald Trump is kind of threatening to stop aid to Ukraine, then you do get into a difficult position. But it doesn't feel like at the moment Zelensky should go. But as I say, that might change very quickly. And also you saw kind of how he was embraced by Keir Starmer, he was embraced by European leaders. And I think he has very good dialogues with those leaders at the moment, and I think that would be difficult were that to change. But potentially it could just get to too great an impasse between him and the States.
Do you think that it's too much of a conspiracy theory to suggest that that is what Friday night was all about? Vance and Trump effectively trying to force Zelensky into a position where he would have to resign?
Potentially, but if it was, I'm not sure that it worked, because I think a lot of people saw that as essentially bullying. I think a lot of people saw those scenes and didn't think Volodymyr Zelensky is in the wrong. They thought, what on earth are J.D. Vance and Donald Trump doing? So if that was the aim, I don't think it worked. It may have worked in the United States, where some Republicans really did think that went down well. Some Republicans really do wonder why Volodymyr Zelensky doesn't wear a suit, as was asked by someone in the Oval Office.
Do they wonder the same about Elon Musk, I wonder?
But exactly. Apparently not. Apparently he wasn't, visiting the White House. He wasn't asking Donald Trump for money in that instance. The explanation I've heard for that. But I think it is pretty difficult.
He works in the White House. That's all you need to know. Zoe.
Farage is just, this is not a good line to take. He overplayed his hand. Okay, what does that mean? What hand is it that Zelensky is overplaying? Zelensky, is doing an amazing job against the most horrendous invasion from a rogue and aggressive force that has zero right on its side. Zero. None of it's acceptable. None of it's okay. And the way that they are edging us, and Farage has obviously kind of slightly been drinking the kind of Kremlin light Kool-Aid, because that's what lurks behind the whole, Zelensky didn't play it right, as if the problem with this whole scene was that Zelensky didn't play it right to those two clowns in the White House. So I mean, to me, this is just a very scary precedent to think that we're being, it's like sub in Churchill for this, right? Oh, Churchill should go because Hitler is still not happy, kind of thing. It doesn't work. And this isn't that exactly, but it's a similar slide with the people saying, we just need peace. But no, we need peace on what exact terms? You don't just appease, you don't just give in to the bully, and you don't just remove the person who's been fighting that bully because they seem to be standing in the way of that bully winning, which is what Trump and Vance want. And I think Farage's comments suggest that he's completely on that memo, and that is as good as a kind of, real weaselly, Kremlin-y line, as far as I'm concerned.
Now, Nigel Farage has been very nice about the Liberal Democrats recently, because, of course, he sits behind you lot, doesn't he, in the Commons? And I wrote a piece saying that most Liberal Democrat MPs I've met since the election are basically look like Tories, sound like Tories, very nice people. And he texted me and said, they are very nice people.
Well, he certainly thinks and knows that we're great campaigners, so that's fantastic. Yeah. He's certainly been...
Well, he's modelled his party constitution on yours as well, I think.
Yeah, I've heard that. So, I mean, obviously, just going back to, Zoe, what you're talking about, it's disappointing to see that Farage is, just parroting the words of Trump effectively in the UK, and that seems to be the most important, thing to him at the moment, rather than really listening to people. And it's just disappointing to hear that. And it just seems like he wants to cozy up to Trump and Musk, and I don't think that's what people here want to see. And I think on Zelensky, we've literally just unfortunately, seen the third anniversary since the invasion of Ukraine. Zelensky's done a magnificent job. He's been a war leader for 3 years. He's standing up for his people. Why now should he step down just because the leader of the free world thinks that that's the thing that he should be doing? He's been so strong over the past 3 years, and in spite of the thousands of Ukrainians that have sadly lost their lives as a result of this absolutely devastating war.
Simon?
Yeah. It wasn't long ago, people forget this, it wasn't long ago, I remember going to Westminster Hall for a speech by Zelensky to both Houses of Parliament, 1,000 people at least crammed into Westminster Hall, literally standing room only. I don't think I'd heard anything quite like it before or since, and I know everybody else in the room was of the same view. That was less than 3 years ago. When the UK Parliament, and to be honest, the UK population represented in that way, were absolutely in awe of what this person was doing, the circumstances into which his country had been plunged, and the manner in which he was responding. And so I think what we're witnessing with Farage now, maybe unsurprisingly, is a greater propensity and desire to maintain his sort of curious relationship with Donald Trump than it is actually just say and do the right thing by Zelensky and by British people. And I think he has found himself in a really difficult position, where just bellowing his particular view from the nearest sort of pub bar isn't enough. And I think that what it's also highlighted is the fact that Starmer and Kemi Badenoch and Ed Davey have actually handled this with a degree of gravitas that you would expect from the leader of the government and indeed the opposition parties. And the temptation to go down the route of sort of political expediency by those three leaders, by Kemi, by Ed Davey and by Keir Starmer, I think has been exemplary. I think Farage has just demonstrated that he's more interested in his relationship with Trump than he is with that. I think that's been revealing.
Do you think the same could be said of Peter Mandelson? Because Nigel Farage and Peter Mandelson seem to agree on a lot today.
No, I don't think you could. And I don't have to say I'm not following Peter Mandelson's every word. Maybe I should do. What I do think, being just about old enough to remember this, is I just think I'm not sure that the response that we've seen in the US and the unfolding noise that Donald Trump's making about this, I don't think Ronald Reagan would have done that. I don't think Obama would have done that. I don't think Clinton would have done that. I don't think either of the Bushes would have done that. This doesn't strike me as the sort of behaviour.
Just on the useless minister, Michael says, according to George Osborne on his podcast, it must have been Gillian Keegan.
George is having a punt as well.
Can you deny that?
The trouble is, yes, I repeatedly deny everything at the moment.
Yeah, but if I actually came up with the name, would you deny it then?
George was pestering me for some kind of information on this as well, but I gave him exactly the same answer that I gave you in an answer.
I'm trying, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying.
I will give you the same answer on Thursday when we speak again.
Right. It's 8:33 on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines from Darryl Jackson.
US President Donald Trump has said he wants the war in Ukraine to end fast, adding he thinks his Ukrainian counterpart should be more appreciative for the support they've received during the conflict. Volodymyr Zelensky says Kyiv is counting on aid from America, but says an end to the fighting with Russia could be very, very far away. The Pope is suffering from new breathing issues and has been put back on mechanical ventilation. He continues to be treated in hospital for pneumonia. Ofcom has written to the BBC saying it has ongoing concerns about a programme on life in Gaza, which it has pulled from its catch-up service. The regulator says it will allow the broadcaster to complete its own investigation, but warned it could decide to intervene. LBC weather dry and clear tonight for Wales and southern England. Spots of rain further north and a low of -4.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:36. Helen Maguire from the Liberal Democrats is here. Now, you've been made a party defence spokesperson, like straight into Parliament. I imagine that's not something you were expecting when you got elected. What are the challenges of immediately going effectively onto the front bench?
No, I wasn't expecting that at all. But it was a very welcome appointment. And obviously, initially in the first 6 months, we have to set up our office as well. So we were trying to do that, recruit staff, and then obviously trying to be a front bench spokesperson as well. It just means that you've got to be across a brief a bit more. You've got to understand it more in detail. I used to be in the armed forces, so I served in the British Army and the Royal Military Police, and I served in Iraq and Bosnia, so I guess that gives me a little bit of a leg up at least.
One of my best friends was in the Royal Military Police, also a woman.
Right.
Former MP, you'll know Keith Simpson's wife, Peppy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to read her diaries one day. Right, we also have Aggie Chambre. I haven't got a sort of question for you because I see you every day.
It's lovely, isn't it?
It's absolutely gorgeous. And Zoe Strimpel, columnist for the Sunday Telegraph. What do you tend to... do you have a sort of area that you tend to concentrate on in your columns, or you just write about anything you fancy?
Well, I get a little bit of pushback. I don't have complete dominion, but there are sort of themes that I return to. I suppose the era of the culture wars was kind of the beginning of my most recent era. I used to write about other things and gender and relationships and feminism stuff, which I still go back to. But I suppose I'm interested in how moral questions play themselves out through seemingly kind of peripheral cultural questions, and how these politics are actually really important. Like the culture, I've always said from the start, the culture war is a real war and heads will roll, and that has proved to be true. And that has been kind of my basis for how I've kind of, it's actually been a very versatile kind of starting point, because that has ended up really being kind of front page news in various ways for years, actually. But I try not to be too repetitive and stale. I mean, I'll take whatever comes along as well.
Right, let's go to Ravi in Isleworth. Hello, Ravi.
Yes, good evening, panel. The Housing Minister said this afternoon future developments with regards to flats and the leaseholders will mean there will be common leaseholds. Now, I'm one of 5 million who are caught out, excessive ground rents, excessive service charge. What good is that for us? Because who would buy my flat where there is a lease? People would rather buy their flats in the future where there'll be no lease. Isn't that strange? There's no help for us now, but there'll be help for the future.
Well, that seems a very logical point to make. Now, the leasehold system will be banned for all new properties built in England and Wales under plans set out by the Housing Minister Matthew Pennycook today. But no measures will be taken to benefit the 5 million people who already own leasehold properties, requiring them to pay fees to the freeholder who owns the land their property is built on. I think this is one of those where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, Aggie.
I think that's right. I mean, so this is something Labour promised to do in their manifesto. Essentially, they promised that they would ban new leasehold flats. They obviously today have laid out their white paper, the kind of first step to actually doing that. They also said in their manifesto that they would tackle unregulated and unaffordable ground rents. So that could be something coming down the tracks, Ravi, that might address the 5 million people currently living in those flats. But this is something that has been kind of rumbling on as a huge issue for a really long time, actually, and it's something maybe Simon could talk more about. But Michael Gove, when he was in the cabinet, actually did try and do this. He said, I'm going to ban leaseholds, and then for various different reasons, I think pressure from some Tory MPs, that got watered down and basically never really happened. And some of the measures he did put through never actually made it into practice. So this is what the government is trying to do, and essentially this is a big step in a way that they're going to ban the new leaseholds. But as Ravi says, I mean, lots and lots of people pay huge amounts of money, and also part of the problem is that it can go up. You can be paying kind of sign up to a house, buy a flat that you're paying £300, and then it can go up to £600, £900 because there are problems with the building, and it's unregulated, to use that word from the manifesto, and it can basically make your flat unsellable. So people are in these terrible situations, and, you know, as laid out there, this doesn't seem like the end of the problem for those people at all, because this is specifically for new flats.
Simon, Michael Gove tried to do this, didn't he, in your government?
Yes,
and
he did.
Singularly failed.
He went as far as he possibly could, as fast as he possibly could. Aggie's right. Unfortunately, we ran out of time when the election
backbenchers wouldn't have it.
2024 came along. So
but you chose to have the election then, so I suppose could have been longer.
Well, there's something. There's always a casualty when an election is held. I mean, there's no such. I don't think an election's ever been held where everything was done and dusted. I think we did something like 9 or 12 bills in the final week of the Parliament. You know, we try and get stuff through, but requiring the opposition and the government and the House of Lords to agree something in a matter of 3 or 4 days isn't always easy. And on this particular subject, if my memory serves me right, the then opposition Labour didn't want this to be the sort of final thing that we did. Anyway, be that as it may. But what Gove was attempting to do was strike that almost impossible balance between looking after the interests of landlords, didn't want this to be an anti-landlord measure, at the same time as trying to iron out some of the unquestionable unfairnesses which tenants leaseholders were experiencing at the time. There was, you're right, a significant number of Conservatives, both in the Commons and the Lords, who didn't sort of feel that it was a very conservative measure. But I think if this now comes forward again under the new government, I think there will be some resistance. But I suspect it will be fairly muted. There will be some traditionalists who just don't think we should touch the market at all, and those who recognise actually probably there are some things which we can do which doesn't compromise landlords, but will actually help leaseholders. So I think there might be some noise, but I suspect this will happen.
Helen, I don't know your constituency well, but I would imagine this is an issue for many of your constituents.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't have a number to hand of obviously how many leaseholders we have, but look, this has been a long-standing Liberal Democrat campaign. In fact, I'm informed that it was David Lloyd George who laid it down in the People's Budget in 1909, so we've been campaigning on this for a very long time.
Not very well by the sound of it.
So we're delighted that it's going through, but I mean, you know, Ravi's absolutely right that it's great, obviously, for new builds, but it's not going to affect obviously the 5 million people who currently actually have leasehold. So that is a challenge. It's a challenge for the government and politicians moving forward. But it's just a really difficult situation to be in when you own a leasehold property and you're just, your rates are increasing the whole time. And I think we need to find a fairer system. And I think this way forward is a fairer way for everyone.
Zoe.
Well, I mean, there could be some slightly more layered proposal for people who actually have existing leaseholds, because I agree it completely makes no sense and is unfair that they have to keep being mired in this kind of totally surplus charge that doesn't benefit them in the slightest, even though they own the property. It seems to me that it's like people who live in blocks of flats that aren't enormous. Maybe they should be given some sort of incentive. The freeholder should be encouraged to sell, so that the people can form their own kind of share of freehold corporation or whatever. Somehow to either kind of come down hard on the freeholders and say, you've got to sell these if it's a flat of under, 10 flats or whatever, or to kind of make it free for the leaseholders to do that transaction or something, because there is you can transition from leasehold to share of freehold now for flats. I think just this question is, when you have an enormous building, how does that work? But it doesn't mean that a freeholder just gets to sit there and just take money for nothing. Obviously, commercial properties and different types of land, it's a different story. But I do think there's a lot of people who just live in a kind of a flat in a block of 4, and they just have to keep paying to this completely unresponsive, secretive figure who isn't even the management company, which the block of flats could have themselves, and they just sit there collecting money for literally doing nothing, and it's just a rip-off.
Right, we'll move on in just a moment, and of course we have our fun question at the end of the programme, which our panel always look forward to. It's 8:45.
This is LBC. Meet Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:48, Helen Maguire, Simon Hart, Zoe Strimpel and Aggie Chambre with us. WhatsApp question from Robbie in Chelmsford. Inspired by Simon Hart's revelations, that's not a sentence you hear often, Simon.
Never before.
If we paid our politicians better, would we get a higher calibre of representation? Or would this just encourage more excess and bad behaviour amongst our MPs? And what else can be done to keep MPs out of trouble? Simon Hart?
I don't think it's about money. Actually, and the vast majority, I want to really stress this, the vast majority of people I've met in 15 years in politics, a bit more, have been good people who've gone in for the right reasons, who want to do a decent job, and say are not doing it for the financial rewards. And there are numerous examples of those people. They don't make the serialisation, but there is far more of them than there are the other. I do think one of the things which it really struck me almost every day that I was doing the job that I was doing is that we take people into being MPs. We give them a budget, we give them an office, we give them staff. We then, a few years in, might make them a minister. We get a red box and a jag and probably responsibility for a multi-billion pound department. We don't give them a day's training in either. And that is the big problem here. We're plunging people into things without any mentoring, without any training, very little support. It's got miles better, by the way, and the house facilities, I think, are miles better than they used to be when I started. But we just can't, and not everybody is as adept at just dealing with all of that as others might be. And the wheels fall off from time to time. And I don't want to excuse it or necessarily make light of it, but the fact is we need to do more to make sure that we give people the best possible chance of success. And that in doing that, we will minimise the risk that something catastrophic that will go wrong, whether it's just a word out of place or something worse.
I remember in 2009 interviewing Jackie Smith just after she had resigned as Home Secretary, and she made exactly that point, that she started the job as Home Secretary with no training. I think it was a terror incident on her first day in the job. And she wasn't bemoaning there, but you just have to realise that people come into these jobs with no training. Daily Mail headline the next day, Jackie Smith admits she is useless at her job. Yeah, and you can't win, can you?
You can't, and that squeezes that has a very long-term detrimental effect, and it does ultimately act as a massive turn-off for anybody who's thinking, oh, maybe I've done a career in the NHS or I've done a career in the armed forces, and actually I'd quite like to go into representative politics, either in a local government election or parliamentary. And every time something like this happens, that gene pool gets squeezed a bit more, and the consequences.
Helen, what were you thinking?
Yeah, it's actually a good
Is that what your family say?
Yeah. Thankfully, I have a very, very supportive family. But, look, for most politicians, it takes a long time. It's really difficult to get here. Most people are campaigning for years to get here. They're pouring huge amounts of, personal finance into this. They have massive support from family and friends. And I know of colleagues who've had to remortgage the house and all the rest of it just to get here. So Simon's absolutely right. People are doing it for the right reasons. And most people won't do that, during the interview process. So we hope that we get the right people involved here with obviously the right experience. But I think I concur with what Simon's saying as well about the training, the mentoring, and the support. I ran a couple of businesses before coming in, so that was really helpful for me in terms of setting up an office. But there are many MPs who've never had to manage a budget like that before, and just in terms of recruiting and the HR side and everything else.
That's enough about Rachel Reeves. No, to be fair to her, she did. Zoe.
I think the pay. I don't think pay is the way to keep a lid on unfortunate things happening with MPs or politicians. I'm cheered to hear that it is still the case that there's a heavy dose of idealism in it. I like to think that also about American very ambitious people in America who want to get into politics, because one starts to believe the political dramas one sees on TV, that it's all about ambition and power. And I don't think for most people it probably is all about that. I don't know if training and all that HR stuff is the way to stop these things happening. In a way, people they aren't coping with ever more complex briefs, clearly, that they're expected to be able to handle. But it just seems like, come on, a bit of common sense that seems to have gone out the window in general in life. Something maybe along the way in the education system, something else in the ether to do with life lived on social media or whatever. But there's just sort of learn how to talk, read some books, be pretty well educated, have some common sense, have some decency, and you should be in quite good stead.
And the candidate selection process doesn't always do that. Yeah. It does sometimes, and we get some brilliant people, but it doesn't always do that. It sometimes just identifies people who are brilliant in a policy.
Now you're out of Parliament. You wouldn't answer this question while you were still an MP, and I'm not going to ask you, Helen. How much do you think an MP should be paid?
Well, I used to occasionally have arguments with constituents who would say we were all paid far too much, and I used to say, well, how about if we were paid the same amount as a sort of head teacher at a big comprehensive? And they say, yeah, that's fine, absolutely agree. But I said, well, that's great, because that's about 30 grand more than we're on at the moment.
At least.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it needs to be that difficult place, which is enough to attract people who've been successes in their own particular world, including public sector, but not a sort of vulgar amount which just triggers all sorts of antipathy towards them. And I think, having had a pretty shaky start, IPSA, the people who are responsible for all of this, have got to a not bad place. It's sort of roughly in line with international comparisons and all of that kind of stuff. But I think for people who just think all MPs are overpaid, generally speaking, there's no figure low enough to satisfy them.
No. Quite. Right, let's go to a text question from Layla in Hull. The workers' rights changes now won't let us reject calls from the boss outside of working hours, despite it being a key part of Labour's manifesto last year. I'm glad he's standing up for the Ukrainian people, but has Keir Starmer forgotten about standing up for the British people as well? Now that it is true that Labour are dropping this. Well, I'm not sure it specifically referred to phone calls, but it's certainly referred to emails. Zoe.
Well, I don't think it's a zero-sum game, and I think that whether or not people are expected to answer text messages or emails at 1 a.m. Shouldn't be to the advantage or detriment of what happens in Ukraine. But I do get the point. I'm sure this is a detail in the overall bill, so I don't know the details of the rest of it. But in terms of the switching off idea and the out of office being respected, I think it's a tricky one. I think it depends on the business that you're dealing with. I think extremely highly paid corporate lawyers doing multinational commercial, like high stakes transactions where they're getting millions of pounds a year to do so. Yeah, I think the client's going to expect them to be on hand at all times for short periods of time. A kind of averagely paid person for whom a late night message is absolutely not necessary would be right to feel a bit harassed by that. But is this not something that you would expect to be able to kind of clarify in person with your employer, or at least, again, through recourse to common sense? I mean, I would find it quite claustrophobic and anxiety inducing to be getting sort of demanding messages at all hours in a way that seemed unnecessary, because it would make me think, can I trust this person's judgment and reason-making process, that they don't have a sort of moment where they think, well, I'll send this as an email, they can check tomorrow. But a text message is a different one. That would feel very kind of a bit too close to the, I don't know, a bit intrusive. So it does seem, I think it depends on the work. I think it depends on the pay. I think it depends on the dynamics in that office. And I think it's the sort of thing, ideally, people would be able to work out verbally. I do think we're in a place now where it's actually incredibly hard to have sort of conversations that might be awkward. It's all very scary now to do that. So that's why there needs to be defended. It needs to be defended in the law and all this kind of stuff. But maybe it's less of a big deal.
Aggie.
I think it kind of depends what industry you're in, right? I mean, it's really difficult in Westminster because pretty much everything happens on WhatsApp, and so you don't sort of deal in emails in the same way, and then it doesn't seem sort of that offensive at all to get a WhatsApp because that's how you've been dealing on your personal phone throughout the day. I think that does become more complicated when it comes to MPs because they are encouraged, I understand, to not be messaging staffers on WhatsApp, on email, kind of outside office hours. That is more complicated. But as Zoe says, it depends completely on the industry. If you're in an industry where you just don't need to be getting a text at 10 p.m. saying, why haven't you done that work? Obviously, that's a completely different situation to be flagging a news story ahead of the next day at 10 p.m.
I mean, if I have an idea for the show, I have to react to that idea and send a message to Corey and Chris, or you sometimes, and it can be 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, I don't expect a reply at 1 o'clock in the morning, but I've registered that I've had this idea and I want to know what people think, whether it's sort of the next day or the day after that. I don't think that's... Is that intrusive? Do you find it intrusive? Go on,
No,
be honest.
No, I don't find that intrusive at all, mainly because I'm asleep at 1 a.m, so I get that in the morning when I wake up because I'm a normal person. But I think
I'm not normal.
Anyway, I think one of the reasons that Labour is ditching this is because they are increasingly having this slightly difficult relationship with business. Rachel Reeves really kind of flirted with business before Labour won the election, and this is something business wanted them to do, and now they've done it.
I've been a very bad presenter because I've just noticed the time and we're almost out of time. So can you both 30 seconds on this, Simon?
Yeah, I just think there's a huge difference between the urgent and the mundane. In my role, if the PM rang me at any time of day or night, I answered the phone. And I tried to be on the ball and cheerful because he might have been in any part of the world. My job was to be available at all possible times, and I would never have complained about that.
Helen?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it very much depends on the role. I mean, there are occasions in my role when geopolitics are such that I might just say, there's something going off tonight as a particular meeting, so can you just be on standby just in case? But I'd always make my staff aware of that. So, yeah.
Right, here is our fun question. Sadie in Bridgend says, in the same weekend, we've had Zelensky ridiculed over his jumper and Adam Sandler being the butt of jokes at the Oscars for turning up in a hoodie and basketball shorts. When have you been accused of dressing inappropriately? Who shall I go to first? I don't mean to look at you, Aggie, so I'm going to go to Zoe.
I'll own that. Well, I don't think I need to be accused because I just quite often make poor choices or don't observe what's going on. So I recently went to a very important meeting with a very high up important person and only noticed after that I had a sort of baby food sort of smashed into the shoulder of my sweater, so that was the sort of moment where I punished
the king
myself.
was telling me about that.
Yeah, I bet he was. And I've also been known to, I'm quite a sort of door answerer in bathrobe, and it's quite an outlandish bathrobe. And I feel like if somebody could tell me off for that, they would, but they don't have to because I just tell myself off, but then just keep doing it.
Aggie?
I wore the wrong colour leotard when I was in a school production of Guys and Dolls as Adelaide, and I am still embarrassed about it. It's inappropriate. Wrong colour.
Simon?
The first ever TV interview I ever did when I was working for the Countryside Alliance years ago, GMTV in the morning. I was in my 20s, but I had an outbreak of gout. And the only shoes I could get on was 2 Wellington boots. So I went in the studio in a suit, a tie, nice shirt, all that kind of stuff, but 2 slightly worn-looking Wellington boots. And I thought the interview went rather well, but I was remembered for other things.
Helen?
Do you know, I couldn't remember an instance, but the one thing that came into my mind was the Only Fools and Horses scenario where Batman and Robin turn up dressed as Batman and Robin to a funeral, and I just thought, that's just your classic.
God, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much indeed for coming on the show tonight. Tomorrow's panel includes Labour MP Josh Simons, Conservative peer and former Defence Minister and Army Officer Lord Andrew Robothan, the theatre producer and director Jude Kelly, and the Financial Times journalist and commentator Robert Shrimsley. So they'll be here answering your questions tomorrow night. Coming up in the next hour, I want to talk about the gender pay gap, but not in the way that you would normally expect me to, because apparently young women now earn £2,200 more than men as the gender pay gap goes into reverse amid what is called a crisis of masculinity. I mean, this part of me is tempted to say, so what? Isn't that what the gender pay gap is all about? Sort of working towards a situation where women can either get at least what men get or even possibly more. What do you put this down to? And what on earth is a crisis of masculinity? And a shout out to Mary, who says, Iain Dale, I love your show. You can keep listening, Mary. Thank you very much.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Donald Trump says he thinks Ukraine's leader should be more appreciative as tensions between the pair deepen. The US president insists he wants to